Carl, going back to your career, your start here in Kansas City in December of 1988, you're hired by the great Lamar Hunt. We talked about him before. You take over as team president and general manager. How did that opportunity come about for you? And tell us a little bit more about Lamar, what kind of man he was and what kind of owner he was to work for.
Well, I think I met him first time when I was with the Philadelphia Eagles, and I was the director of player personnel. Dick was the head coach. I met him at a couple owners' meetings, and, you could tell right away what a fine person this guy was. His reputation preceded him. I mean, he was the most modest, stay in the background type of guy there was. He never wanted any reflection on himself, but only the players and the coaches and where it should be. But he called me in November of 1988, and said, I'd like you to come and look at my team, and I'd like you to do it quietly. I said, fine, I'm happy to do that. So I flew out here to Kansas City. I was in Philadelphia at the time, and took a look at his team. And then he said, I'd like you to tell me what you think you need to do if you are offered the job to run the team. And so I put together a little report for him. And he called me and he said, you're my guy. And I told him, frankly, I'll be candid here. It's a lot to ask Dick, but if you want me, I've got to be the president, general manager, and CEO. And it's not because of an egotistical thing. It's because you have to have direction from the top down. And right now, unfortunately, the team was in disarray. And frankly, the term was apathetic. People just didn't care about the Chiefs. And they had been down so long, 15, 16 years of losing one playoff year, and John Makovic, and then they fired Makovic. So he said, it's done. And I couldn't have asked for a better boss. I mean, the guy was super. He'd call once a week from Dallas, Texas, and say, Carl, how are we doing, and how can I help? And he meant it. And I'd say, Lamar, I need you on Sunday to get here to judge a tailgating contest out in the parking lots. Because as I said, we're going to emphasize tailgating. So the one thing I know about the Midwest fan, because I scouted every college in the country, and particularly in the Midwest, they love to tailgate. And I said, that's what we're going to push. I said, it's going to hurt us at the concession stands, but we got to get fannies in the seats. We got to fill this beautiful stadium, 78,500. And, they were only putting about a third filled each Sunday they played. So anyway, it began. And then obviously I hired a dear friend who had called me after he got fired at Cleveland, Marty Schottenheimer. And the rest is history, as they said. He did a marvelous job. We were together 10 years. They said the Cleveland writers, that marriage wouldn't last a year. And we lasted 10. But that's how it all began. And again, I can't say enough about Lamar. He was a hands-off owner, but he was also involved. And of course, he was a pillar in the league. When he and Ralph Wilson and the New York owner and these guys would talk, the Steelers, they all listened, everybody, because they wanted to hear what Lamar Hunt had to say at the league meetings. And they always thought about the league first and their franchise second. And I said, Lamar, that's terrific. I said, but I'm going to think about the Chiefs first and the NFL second.
And you definitely did that. Just talk a little bit more about, building that culture here. The Chiefs had only been in 2 playoff games since Super Bowl IV when you took over, and immediately you hire Marty Schottenheimer, you draft Derek Thomas, and that's sort of the foundation for the culture. People think that the terms like Chiefs Kingdom, Arrowhead being the loudest stadium in the NFL, that all was built right there under your watch. And hiring a Marty Schottenheimer, we were able to make a documentary for Marty, and we presented it to him a couple summers ago at his home in North Carolina. And just sort of talk about your relationship with him kind of then and now, as Marty's obviously suffering from Alzheimer's, just what a tremendous coach and person he was.
Well, I knew Marty going back to when I was coaching my first year with the Philadelphia Eagles with Vermeil from UCLA. I coached the tight ends and wide receivers. And Marty was coaching outside linebackers for the New York Giants. So we played them twice a year. And he had some pretty good linebackers. And anyway, I gained a great deal of respect. I think it was mutual. And we kept in contact. And then I went the administrative route. And he kept going up the defensive coordinator ladder, and then to Cleveland as a coordinator, and then eventually the head coach. I knew I wanted to hire a seasoned, experienced veteran head football coach that had been a winner. And Marty had been to 2 AFC championship games. He had won 4 division titles at Cleveland. He did a great job. Frankly, Art Modell did us one of the biggest favors there was by firing him. And he called me, this was Marty, in early January and said, listen, I know you're looking for a head coach. I'd love to interview with you. I said, you're on. And we interviewed a couple times. I was interviewing a couple other people, but my mind was pretty well made up. And I said, I'm going to call the owner. And Lamar said, Carl, if you think that's best for the Chiefs, let's do it. That was his line all the time. And I said, this is the right guy. Marty came in. We hit the ground running. The fans were hoping that we just might be competitive, maybe a 500% season. And we went 8-7-1. We had a winning season. We were a half a game out of the playoffs. And then, of course, for the next 7-8 years, we're in the playoffs every year. Outstanding football coach that really could deal with young men, and they would trust him. And that's what I think Marty's watchword was. He wanted to gain their trust. And when he had that, then they would do anything for him. The first draft was obviously, I had hired a defensive coach, and I knew what he would want. And we went out and worked out Derek Thomas at Tuscaloosa, University of Alabama, and took Bill Cowher, who was our defensive coordinator, with us. And he gave Derek every drill he could imagine and couldn't tire him out. And he'd come back and give you that big smile and say, Coach, what else do you want to see? Mr. Peterson, what else do you want to see? And we knew then, we were just hopeful that he would fall to the 4th pick. And thank goodness he did. And so he became, the building block there. And Marty built a great defense. And my job was, once I hired the head coach and helped him hire his staff, football support staff, and got him the players, was to fill the stadium. I said, look, players want to play in an environment that they love. And we got a chance here at this magnificent stadium. And like I said, we're going to find a way to do that. And I had some great people working for me in marketing and sales. And we came up with the theme of, tailgating. And once that got going, it just took off like a fire. And we had a lot of fun in those first 10 years.
Yeah, moving forward a little bit to 1993, you draft Will Shields. That's a big move. But the really big news is when you bring in Joe Montana and Marcus Allen. If you can, take us behind the scenes, kind of in the decision to pursue Joe and Marcus, achieving that and getting both of them to Kansas City, and what they brought and meant to the team at that time.
Well, first of all, both Marty and I concurred we needed to have a quarterback. And we'd like to get an experienced one, just like when I hired Marty, an experienced winning one. And Lynn Stiles was our director of player personnel on our staff. And Lynn and I go back to UCLA together under Vermeil. Lynn said, look, we know one thing, that the 49ers have 2 great quarterbacks. And with the CBA came in, the salary cap, they couldn't keep both Steve Young and Joe Montana. So I called Carmen Policy, the president of the 49ers, and I said, okay, which quarterback do you want to trade me? And he said, what are you talking about? I said, Joe or Steve? And he said, well, I don't want to trade either one. I said, I know that, but I also know the salary cap, and you're not going to be able to keep both of them and pay them both as starters. And so we started a negotiation. And of course, when we finally got him to agree that he would trade Joe, he wanted a 1st, 2nd, and 3rd round pick. And I said, wait a minute, I'm not going to do that. I said, Joe is certainly worth a great deal, but he's also 36 years old. He was coming off an injury. That's the injury that gave Steve Young the chance to get in and start and take him to the championship. And I said, I'll give you a 1st, but you got to give me something back. So we went back and forth. And eventually, I think I got a 5th round pick and a player, their starting safety. And Joe came in, and he was really great. He was the best. And his wife and he loved Kansas City. I mean, they went out in one afternoon and found a home. And so he was ready to come. But of course, I knew that I was going to have to do a new contract with him. Tom Condon was his agent, and IMG. And so we put together a contract very quickly, and he came. And all this time that we were doing this, we were looking at unrestricted free agents. And obviously the one that really caught our eye was Marcus Allen. We played him twice a year with the damn Raiders, and he was leaving. There was no question about that. He and Al Davis did not get along. And so we're recruiting him as well as some other teams were recruiting him, but couldn't trade for him. You know, had to convince him this was the best place for him and with a contract and so forth. And when the trade was announced that we had Joe Montana, I got a call from Marcus, and he said, "Carl, did you get Joe?" And I said, "We got Joe." He said, I'll be a Chief." He said, "For two reasons. One," he said, "I've always wanted to play with Joe Montana. Almost every running back in the league had wanted to. And number two, I get to play those damn Raiders twice a year." So we ended up with both of them. So that was our first and second round draft choice, if you want to say. And the third one was Will Shields, who obviously has gone on to a Hall of Fame career. But getting those two guys really pushed us over the top. And, of course, took us all the way to the AFC Championship game.
Yeah, you mentioned it there, the success you guys had, beat the Steelers, beat the Oilers, get to the AFC Championship game against the Buffalo Bills. But 1995, we got to talk about it. You guys make the playoffs. You take on the Colts in one of the coldest games ever played. Steve Bono throws 3 interceptions. Lynn Elliott misses 3 field goals. The game's lost 10-7. But we've talked to James Hasty on this very show about that game, and he said after the game itself, him, Derek Thomas, Marcus Allen, they locked themselves in the equipment room and cried like babies. It still kind of hurts him to this day, to where he felt like he let the city down and doesn't feel like he can come back to Kansas City. I mean, you hear those words, those emotions 25 years later. Now, maybe not quite to that extent, but do you somewhat share in those sentiments that James has?
Oh, absolutely. You know, that was one of the bitterest defeats I've ever been involved with, whether it was the college at UCLA or the Philadelphia Eagles, or obviously here in Kansas City. You know, it was a strange day. It was an ice storm. And I'm going to make a controversial statement here. I'm not sure why, but our offensive coordinator decided he was going to throw the ball rather than run it. And I know that was one of the reasons that Marcus was not happy. And on an ice field, it just wasn't working. You know, there were 6 field goal attempts that day. Their kicker made 1 out of 3. Mm-hmm. Our kicker made 0 out of 3, and that was the difference in the game. But you look back on it, and you like to think, well, you know, things could have been different, should have been different. But that was, up to that point, the toughest game that I've been involved with the Chiefs. Yeah,
James, when we talked to him, he said that Derek wanted to go into the locker room at the halftime and go at Paul Hackett because of all that throwing that he saw. So.
That's probably pretty accurate. But I would tell you that the one thing you take out of that is you appreciate how much these guys love the game and love the Chiefs and felt so terrible after that loss. I know that to be true, that a lot of them just went to their lockers or in the equipment room and just let it go, because it was so we knew we were a better team, but we just couldn't get it over the top.
And that was also the case in 97 as well, playing the Denver Broncos. Now, we sat down with Marty Schottenheimer, and we had to bring it up with Marty. We said, Marty, Gannon or Gerback, whose decision was that? And Pat looked over at us and said, just ask Carl. So 2 years later, here you are. We're asking you, Carl, Gannon, Gerback, whose decision was that, and kind of what led up to that decision being made?
Well, the head coach makes the decisions on who plays. I mean, that's always been my edict. I mean, I have certainly the final say on the 53, but once those 53 are decided, and of course, I'm going to take the head coach's input and all our scouts and assistant coaches and that. But then once the season begins, you know, he has the keys to the car. And Marty, you know, I think reflecting back, he didn't want to make a change of the starter. And he really, he told me, frankly, that he had experienced that when he was a player at Buffalo with the Bills. And he said it tore the locker room apart, that the starter who had been the starter all year, then got hurt and now came back healthy, was not given the job back. And so he said he was going with Gerbeck. And Rich Gannon, as we all know, and he showed it later, was a terrific athlete, person, a quarterback, and did a great job when he went to those hated Raiders. But, I felt bad for Rich. I felt bad for everybody. I felt bad for the entire team. But again, that's just something that happens, and you make those decisions, and then hindsight is always 20/20.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, completely. But 1998, Marty steps down after that season, and since that time, Marty has come out and said it's one of his biggest regrets, kind of feeling sorry for himself and not staying in Kansas City. How much did you and Lamar kind of push for Marty to stay, and how sad was it to see kind of the end of that magical era in Kansas City Chiefs history?
Well, it was his first and only losing season with us, and I know that played a big part in it. He came into my office after the season, and he said, listen, I've been doing this a long time, 10 years with Kansas City and 4 previous ones with Cleveland as a head football coach. 14 consecutive years as a head coach in the NFL puts a lot of strain and stress on you. It puts a lot of strain and stress on the president, general manager, but I mean, even more so on the head coach. And he said, I'm going to step down and retire. And I said, have you talked this over with Pat? He said, yes, I have. And she's in agreement. I said, should I try to talk you out of this? He said, no, it won't do any good. He said, it's time for me, Carl, to step away. I've got to take a deep breath. And he said, I don't know if I'll come back to coaching or not. Maybe I'll go into the communication business, TV, radio, which he did. But he said, now is the time. I knew that I couldn't stop him. And hugged him, thanked him for the 10 years. They were great, 9 of them particularly. So many great memories. We got close in the playoffs almost every year, I think 7 of those years, and all the way to the AFC Championship game. I definitely think, and I know Marty feels it and everybody on that team, if Joe hadn't got hurt in the second half at Buffalo, hitting his head on the frozen turf with a sack by Bruce Smith, I think we would have won that game and gone to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and in that Buffalo AFC Championship game, I think Kimball Landers, the pass goes off his hands. It could have been a touchdown. It's intercepted. Tim Barnett drops a touchdown in the end zone. So there's a lot of missed opportunities in that game for sure.
For sure. But, as the Chiefs today feel with Mahomes, we felt as long as Joe was in there, we had, no matter how far down we were, we've been down to Houston the week before in the playoffs. We can come back. But I think when Joe got hurt and came out and the doctors called me up in the press box and said he's not coming back today, I think everybody took the wind out of our sails, and that was it. But I think, again, I really feel it strongly. If he had stayed healthy, I think we could have still won that game.
Well, Carl, just talk a little bit about your kind of business acumen. You had kind of a love-hate relationship with the media here. During that time, they coined you the term King Carl. Some kind of famous negotiations went on with, guys like John Tate, later Jared Allen, who we just had on the show. But just kind of talk about that, because I feel like it's, in hindsight, that a bit unfair, considering really what you were literally trying to do from the beginning is do what's best for the franchise. I know that's simplifying it quite a bit, but just kind of talk about that and how how that was for you. How kind of some of the media maybe unfairly pegged you with that moniker.
Clinton, no, that's obviously untrue. I love the media, every one of them. For my 20 years here, every day I thought about them. I sent them Christmas cards and birthday cards. My problem with the media was, don't speculate, write or talk or on television the truth. And if you don't know the truth, then don't speculate. And I think, and I know it's a tough job for you guys, and became even more difficult with the internet and so forth. It became, in my mind, no longer be accurate. It became be first. Get it out there. Even if it's not accurate, don't worry about it. It'll be yesterday's news and we'll move on. And I didn't care for that. So I let the media know that aspect. I would tell you that even today I have some very, very good friends, close friends, in the media and have been in the media for years. But that was my number one point. And there were a few people in this city who speculated all the time. And it was just hearsay, but they wanted to go ahead and run with it. And they did. And that, they don't understand that that affects people's lives and their kids and so forth, players and their wives. Anyway, so, it was a love-hate relationship, but I gained a lot of respect for a lot of fine reporters and still speak with them. And they call me all the time and want some type of a quote, and I try to give them something that's accurate.
Yeah. Well, Carl, some of our fondest memories growing up are the great games in the 90s, whether it's Montana and Elway on Monday Night Football, the Steelers-Oilers playoff games, the domination of the Raiders, and the 54-yard Stoyanovich field goal against Denver in 97. Just take us back to some of your favorite games and memories of that time.
Well, you probably named most of them right there. I mean, they were great. Certainly, when we played the 49ers and Joe was our quarterback and Steve Young was there, and my son, as I always affectionately called him, Derek Thomas, we had the 49ers backed up down at the one end of the stadium, which is always the loudest, and he put his hands over his head, signaling a safety, and you knew it was going to happen. And he came in and sacked Steve in the end zone, and we got 2 points. And I didn't think there'd be any way that we'd lose that game. Certainly one that I think that will always resonate in my mind, and I think for certainly the players and the coaches and the fans that were there, was our first Monday night game after I came in and then hired Marty. We were playing the Buffalo Bills, Jim Kelly. They were undefeated. They were the defending AFC champions, and they had a hell of a football team. And when I drove into Arrowhead, and the fans, of course, I'd only opened the gates about 4 hours before, and they were lined up 6 hours before. The smoke, the haze, the barbecue of the stadium was just spectacular. I knew then, I could feel the electricity from our fans that generated to our players and that there's no way we're going to lose this game. And, of course, Marv Levy was the head coach, a longtime dear talent, a Hall of Fame coach. And he told me after the game that they'd never played in an environment like that, never played in a noise like that in an outdoor stadium. And it was a spectacular game. And that really, I think, started us on a major uphill climb. And Marty did a great job. The team did. It was just an exciting time. But, there were a lot of great games in those first 10 years. There were some good ones, too, in the second 10 years with Vermeil and that. But certainly that was a great memory.
Well, so many memories for us, Carl. I don't know, and I mean this, that we'd be where we are doing what we're doing if not for our foundation growing up in Kansas City and those great Chiefs teams. But, before we let you go, I've got to ask you, it's been almost a year to the day since we lost Gunther Cunningham. Of course, he came in after Marty coached here in 99 and 2000, came back as a defensive coordinator in 2003, and just kind of what he meant to you, what kind of person Gunther was. He was a different cat. He was just impetuous. He was intense. It's been almost a year. Just talk to us about Gunther and kind of why he was the choice in 99 and him as a person.
Well, the first thing you got to remember is that the coaching fraternity is very close. And the first time I met Gunther Cunningham, I was coaching the UCLA junior varsity team, and he was coaching the Stanford junior varsity team. We played each other up at Stanford, and we were fortunate to win. I never let Gunther forget that. Okay, he went to obviously Oregon. I went to UCLA and that, but I knew him and about his career. I knew him when he was at the Raiders. He wanted to get away from Al Davis. He told me that personally, and so when he got the opportunity to hire him, Marty did. It was a great hire. And as a defensive coordinator, I'm not sure there are many better than him. He could really incite, get his defensive players ready to play. His passion was overflowing. And so when Marty decided to step down and step away, my decision was, look, I can go out and go through a long search for another head coach, or we had still a defensive-minded football team. I can make this a consistent move and not change a great many things because we've got a very talented guy here. And I said to Gunther, do you want the opportunity? And he said, absolutely. And so I said, you know, for the continuity of it and the consistency of it, we're going to just elevate Gunther Cunningham to be the new head coach. And I know that he worked very hard at it. And he did a fine job. Not a great job, but a fine job. And I think he ended up 500% in 2 years. But then I got an opportunity to hire someone that had been a Super Bowl winner, 2 Super Bowls. I had been with him 3 times. And so, you know, I brought in Dick Vermeil. I know a lot of people were surprised that Gunther came back a few years later with Dick to be the defensive coordinator again. I was not surprised. There was no animosity between myself and Gunther. He knew the business, and it's a tough business. You got to make tough decisions. It's like cutting a player that's worked his tail off and has done a great job for you. But he wanted to come back here, his wife, Renee, and they were terrific here. And then I followed his career, obviously, to Detroit and was at his memorial service a couple of years ago in Michigan to say goodbye to him. Marvelous human being, great person. He was an orphan in the Second World War. His dad was in the German army. He never knew his dad, and married his mother, and they moved to Lompoc, California. She married, I should say, a GI from the United States Air Force. And that's where he grew up and went to school. I mean, we knew each other very, very well. I always had the highest regard for Gunther. And as a coordinator, I don't know there's a better defensive coordinator in the game today.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we met with Marty, we were able to tell him this. We want to be able to tell you this as well. Clint touched on it. But those Chiefs teams of the 90s kind of really shaped and impacted us the most. If the futility of the 80s had continued, we may very well not be in sports media today. So just wanted to take a personal moment here to say thank you to you for the fond memories, steering the franchise back on track, kind of what led to today's current success, and helping lead us into what we're doing today. So seriously, Carl, just thank you so much for what you've done. Well,
that's very kind of you to say, and I appreciate that. And I accept that for all the players and coaches and staff that were involved with us from 1989 till I left 2009 to hopefully help pave the way, like you said. And the obvious is the hiring of Andy Reid was one of the smartest and best things that Clark Hunt and his family could do. And I know that Dick Vermeil was very supportive of that, as I was. And I talk with Andy after every game. We're 35-year friends. And he and Mahomes are a great, great tandem. Marvelous year this last year. I certainly hope, like everyone, they can repeat it. It's hard to repeat, but brought us a lot of thrills also. But I appreciate those 20 years, like I said, and appreciate it most for the best owner in all of professional sports, Lamar Hunt.